We're back. We are going to continue the conversation of our miscellaneous bill S 323. We're looking at sections 1 through 3. We basically have stakeholders coming in today and giving their interpretations of how all of this is affecting them. And we're going to continue on with Maddie Kepner, Policy Director for NOFA. Welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me back. Nice to see you all. So I will be brief also. Jake really presented the position of our coalition that NOFA is a part of very clearly. And so I just want to emphasize a few points that have already been covered and also respond to some of the committee's specific questions.
We definitely want to hear NOFA's position. So even if it repeats whatever, so it's very important to us.
Okay, great. Well, I will start by saying we support responding to the Supreme Court decision in a way that doesn't require opening the RAPs first and foremost, with the exception of, as Jake mentioned, some technical corrections as needed. We'd like to see the changes happen in Title 24 to the extent possible. And just at a really high level, it's very important to us and our members that there is a clear and consistent regulatory environment for farms. I think you all understand that, and that's been said, but I'll repeat it. That's really a high priority for us around this issue. And for that reason, I do want to emphasize a couple other specific points. One is that we take some issue with the carving out in the agency's proposal of farms under 1 acre. It doesn't sound like a lot of land, but we do have farms in our membership that have commercial operations on that acreage or thereabouts. And so just want to be clear about that, that 1 acre sounds small, but there are farms that are operating in a commercial way on, that small of a plot. And okay.
Just to stop. So is there a limit, or what do you deem too small? If anything.
I don't think we would propose a limit or a minimum threshold in terms of acreage. And in part, it relates to not necessarily making these changes in the RAPs. We really want to protect the right of people to grow food, including livestock. And I do want to say, in terms of the protecting of the right to grow food, I'm really heartened to hear so much testimony across different stakeholders about protecting that right. That's something that, you've heard from the league, you've heard from the agency, you've heard from our coalition. And so I feel really excited and hopeful that we all seem to share an understanding that people's right to grow food is essential for food security and for the culture of this state. So I feel really heartened by that.
So just to drill into that a little bit deeper,
yeah.
It really isn't the plant growing that the 1 acre is bothersome to you. It's the livestock part of it, where you're talking about the people that you have are have a livestock. It must be the people you're talking about have livestock. The 1 acre is problematic.
Certainly both. We have producers who are only doing vegetables in a small acreage in Berlin, for example, in a suburban area, or we have folks who are also raising livestock on small amounts of acreage. We do support the agency having the ability to regulate in those instances. We understand that there is a need for there to be an arbiter of, how many livestock is the appropriate amount in what area. We certainly,
even if it's just to regulate through a complaint basis, because I think the agency pretty much said it's pretty hard for them to get out there and regulate that small of a parcel.
I mean, I think that our position on that is that the agency are really the ones with the expertise to be able to determine what's an appropriate amount of land for a certain number of a certain type of livestock. And that's just in line with our goal of having clear and consistent regulations. If that can be applied by the agency across the board, across municipalities, that's what we would like to see. I also just want to raise one point around that too, which is that there are a lot of folks who only have access to small amounts of acreage in, urban or peri-urban or suburban areas of this state, and who don't necessarily have access to or the ability to afford greater amounts of acreage that are in more rural areas. And we really want to protect the right of those people to raise livestock for their families, for their neighbors, for, cultural reasons. There's a lot of equity considerations in protecting those small plots for us. So I just want to emphasize that too. And then on the question of raising the threshold from 2,000 to 5,000, I think Jake was clear about our position that we want to keep it at 2,000. And I've heard in this committee and upstairs some conversation around that and around the fact there's been a lot of inflation in the last 10 years since that threshold was set. I want to emphasize that farmers are also facing those inflationary pressures and are subject to them, and deal every year with the cost of increasing labor, increasing fuel costs, increasing other, there's the cost of other supplies.
Taxes.
And that doesn't necessarily come along with a corresponding increase in the pay price they're receiving, especially for farmers like dairy farmers who are getting a set price for their product. So I don't think that, inflation necessarily is a good justification for raising that threshold, because it's not necessarily that farmers' income has gone up in a corresponding way. And then I think the last thing I would say is to respond to the league's position around really wanting to have some consistency around tier 1A areas in particular regarding agriculture. We, I think, would be open to, and I will just speak for myself and for NOFA on this point, at the moment, that we'd be open to seeing and working on some affirmative language that makes sure, again, that there is support for in appropriate circumstances and density, the right to grow food in those tier 1A areas. And that protects, as Jake referenced earlier, urban agriculture and supports urban agriculture to happen, because there are a lot of benefits, access to a customer base, people's exposure to agriculture and all that it entails, which is, really aligned with just the culture and the values of Vermont. So we would be really open to seeing some affirmative language and working on some affirmative language that protects agriculture to the extent possible in those downtown areas.
Is that your affirmative language, or you would have more than that? It would go broader than what you've just said.
I think it would need to have it would need to be worked out. I don't have language specifically to propose on that point, but would be open to coming together with, you all with stakeholders in the room to figure out what that should look like in a way that makes folks needs.
Sure. Committee. All set.
All right.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Amber.
Well, this seems a little weird.
Yeah.
Good morning. For the record, Amber Perry, Administrator and Policy Director of Vermont Farm Bureau. Thank you, Committee and Chair Ingles, for having myself in today to discuss with you sections within the Bill 323. I'll keep it brief, but I do want to touch on that. I think it's worth noting that while all of the organizations in this Farmers Coalition involved represent a wide range of perspectives, we share a common understanding of the importance of this issue and worked collaboratively to find areas of alignment. And that's something you normally don't see all of us coming in together. So I just want to emphasize that. We also want to touch on that many farms are operating across different towns. Right, we look at our large dairy farms, they're farming within 9, 8 different towns sometimes. So we're asking that the regulations from town to town could become confusing or burdensome. Consistency is going to be critical for farmers to remain compliant while continuing to operate efficiently. At this time, we also recognize and support the right of individuals to grow their own food if they choose. Affirming and protecting that right across all types of development is essential for fostering equitable access to farming and food for all Vermonters. As you've heard in previous testimony, we think that we can resolve this issue without opening the wraps. Farmers are familiar with these standards and manage their operations daily in accordance with them. Amending or altering the wraps could, at this time, introduce unnecessary confusion or could potentially hinder any of the progress we're trying to make. The proposed acreage language within the wraps on page 6 and 7, that 1 to 4 contiguous acres, we just feel like could be confusing. And then also, is there capacity, issues at the agency within that? And based on the Supreme Court ruling back in May, it was clear that the legislative intent was not portrayed, which means that any legislation that we put forward on this matter should be very clear and precise on what the intent is. I'm going to touch on the increase of the threshold income just for a bit. Like, where did this number come from? Where did 5,000 come from? Is it inflation? And if so, You know, farmers are also being subject to paying higher costs for inputs, but at the end of the day, the price that they're being paid for their product remains to be the same or decreased. It also isn't clear how many farms this increase from 2,000 to 5,000 would capture. Are we eliminating some startup farms? That's an area of concern too. And then as for the planned potential growth areas, we know many farms are operating within these areas. I know in my town alone, they've deemed an area a potential growth area that's currently open farmland and is being farmed. Once agricultural land is lost to development, it's gone forever. We must be mindful of the policies and protect and strengthen agriculture rather than create additional pathways that could threaten the long-term viability. Vermont's agricultural landscape is an invaluable resource and it deserves thoughtful and balanced policy solutions. And that's all I have for you.
So I'm gonna ask you a question I asked earlier. You know, we've had quite a few discussions with Farm Bureau, you know, here or elsewhere. How has this decision affected you folks?
So I like to say that Farm Bureau is an umbrella of all different sizes and types of farming, right? We have the smaller farms operating within these tier 1A areas, and we also have large dairy farms that are operating just outside of these tier 1A areas. So it does affect us.
Okay. I mean, if
You didn't mention Schedule F, and Maddie didn't either, but I'll take the that Jake did, so you're all in it.
Yep.
Okay.
ready? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Caroline.
Good morning, you all.
Good morning to you.
For my testimony. Yeah, for the record, Caroline Sherman Gordon, Legislative Director with Rule of Vermont. Thank you all so much for having us in today. And for your effort to reinstate the municipal exemption for farming. Shortly after the Vermont Supreme Court ruling in May last year, Vermont began outreach to other agricultural organizations, worked with the Farm Bureau and the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets to address this issue with the goal of reinstating the reading of the law as it has been commonly understood since 1987. And over the past 6 months, this group has grown to include a large and diverse group of the most significant ag and food system stakeholders in Vermont, including also Agrimark, CAVIT, the Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance, NOFA Vermont, the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, the Connecticut River Watershed Farmers Alliance, Farm to Plate, the Land Access Opportunity Board, but also the American Farmland Trust. Over this time, we have come to alignment on a legislative proposal that we are grateful to discuss with you today. And we come to you with the United Strong message that we need to clearly and plainly reinstate the municipal exemption as it was understood since 1987 by clarifying only the language in Title 24, leave the RMP rule in place as is, and that we also need to codify right to grow food to prevent municipalities from interpreting the housing development agenda of Act 181 as a mandate to push farming and food production out of the heart and plant growth areas of our communities, significantly altering the character of Vermont, which prides itself as a working lands community. The historic settlement pattern of Vermont has occurred in the places that farmers found most suitable for food production. They surely made their choice based on soil and water quality. So there's a direct conflict between the public interest in planning for housing development and food security. As you know, I'm a German-American dual citizen, and through my bachelor's degree in environmental law from Germany, I've learned about the central places principle. This principle was developed by Walter Christaller, a German geographer in 1933, and the central places principle was enshrined in the German Building Code in 1965 as a mandatory statute that doesn't allow residential development outside of town centers. This principle was now adopted into Vermont statute with the passage of Act 181, 2024 as a goal for Vermont's development, quote, to maintain the historic settlement pattern of compact villages and urban centers separated by rural countryside. In Germany, this is the mandate, and only explicit statutory land uses of rural lands are allowed for development in the landscape surrounding towns and urban centers. Thereby, farmers have been privileged as the only people legitimately allowed to develop Germany's countryside with infrastructure aside from permissible enumerated utility infrastructure developed such as development projects for electricity, gas, telecommunications, heat, water, septic, or research projects. That's it. In consequence, Germany prides itself on how its mandatory law effectively maintains the landscape, as about 86% of the country is not developed and about 51% of the territory is still used agriculturally today. And I provided a link to that statistic in my testimony. In the United States, the ship of development has left the harbor since the onset of colonization and hasn't been effectively regulated since. The American Farmland Trust found through their GIS-based research in Vermont that farmland development occurs on 83% due to low-density residential sprawl outside of village centers. And there's a presentation in my testimony where you can see that data on slide 15. When I say that development hasn't been regulated effectively to date, what I mean is that neither Act 250 nor the current use program nor conservation easements effectively prevent farmland loss because the programs are either voluntary or don't capture residential development outside of town centers. For example, we're well underway to lose an additional 61,800 acres of farmland by 2014. And American Farmland Trust has testified to the House that even their worst case rural sprawl scenario, that the current data they have shows that we're exceeding their data development by 49%. So we're much worse on the way than they are projecting. Simultaneously, New England Feeding New England is projecting that the Northeast region will need to bring 401,000 underutilized acres of farmland and additional 588,000 acres of cleared land into agricultural production just to supply 30% of its population's food consumption by 2030. With Vermont and Maine being projected to carry the lion's share of that supply based on their advanced food systems. Act 181 did nothing to change this trajectory, and its legislative process was not concerned with agricultural land laws at all, as the bill never passed an agricultural committee. Instead, its clear focus is the continued development of the state for housing and not to keep the working lands open. The Vermont League of City and Towns represents municipalities that are well underway to implement Act 181 at this time, and we urge the legislature to ask what signals it's sending to municipalities that work to implement its present land use agenda. Farms, food production, and agricultural land are under threat from a number of areas. In parallel with this new Vermont Supreme Court ruling, we are concerned that agriculture will inevitably be pushed out of town centers. We have heard from a service provider's on-the-ground experience that some land trusts may not invest in preserved parcels of land that are marked for development in regional plans. But farmers rely on those investments that they can make based on the sale of their development rights. Likewise, many farms do not accumulate adequate savings and are in the position of selling their farms and farmland or part of them into development to affect their ability to age and move on from farming. We are concerned that there's no legal mechanism that stops developers from taking Vermont's most valuable assets, the agricultural soils. These are often also the most appropriate and easy soil for development. This could result in a Pac-Man approach toward ever expanding and eventually merging towns and ever diminishing agricultural land. Our coalition does not believe that this was the legislature's intention behind Act 181 at all, as this body just passed the Right to Farm law in 2025 that underscored in its findings that, quote, agricultural production is a major contributor to the state's economy, that agricultural lands constitute unique and irreplaceable resources of statewide importance, that the continuation of existing and the initiation of new agricultural activities preserve the landscape and environmental resources of the state, contribute to the increase of tourism, and further the economic welfare and self-sufficiency of the people of the state, that the encouragement, development, improvement, and preservation of agriculture will result in a general benefit to the health and welfare of the people of the state. I will add that also the Right to Farm, Act 61, is not a policy that functions to keep the working lands open, prevent farmland loss, or to make farming more affordable, as it solely protects farmers from nuisance losses when they are in good standing with the REP rule. In consequence, are asked to reinstate the municipal exemption for farming and to codify a right to grow food that can be prohibited by municipal exemption, and I will add that private homeowner associations will be critical to ensure the food sovereignty and food security of our state. Food sovereignty is both an individual right to use subsistence and food cultivating practices, as well as the ability of our communities to define their own food systems. Our coalition's proposal is seeking to bar towns from issuing zoning codes that get in the way of farming practices at any location or scale. Towns need more of a clear signal from the legislature, in addition to the set housing agenda, that they can use their local zoning powers to protect agricultural land use. And this proposal is not intended to stand in the way of towns that have aspirations to set any sort of incentive for citizens to engage in food cultivation practices. And I appreciate that Samantha had mentioned from Rhode Island, the example that there is also legal language out there, how other states have incentivized towns to be more proactively in protecting farmland. Obviously, Vermont needs more housing, especially since the state is known nationwide as having 4 of the most safe counties, Lamoille, Orange, Lakeland, Essex, to live in the country in 30 years from now, given the projections of climate change risk related to extreme heat, wildfire, and sea level rise that ProPublica reported in 2020, projecting the increased migration into the state for those reasons. The goal of all of us in Vermont should be to develop this place in a sustainable, resilient, and food secure way so that the public interest in housing development and agricultural land and farmland laws need to be weighed and balanced in a much more careful and accountable way moving forward. Over 70% of Vermonters cultivate some of their own food today, according to the Feeding New England Vermont State Brief. And I assure you that many people of my generation come here to engage in farming and the food system as well. The Vermont Supreme Court ruling now establishes the legal basis for town-by-town farm regulation variances, possibly creating a confusing and complex patchwork of regulatory frameworks across the state, which will be difficult to navigate and that existing and beginning farmers will have to face. Depending on where a farm is located, it could be subject to different levels of local regulations and oversight that others are not exposed to, creating unfair market conditions while we keep losing farms and farmland. We believe the Vermont Supreme Court's guidance points to the need for a clear and consistent regulatory framework across farming scales and municipalities. Legislative Council shared that the ruling would now result in the applicability of the RFPs across scales and regardless of farming determination, and that the court called the existing criteria that distinguish what is farming based on factors such as someone is keeping 14 or 15 goats as leading to anomalous results. Our coalition agrees that we want to avoid a patchwork regulatory environment for farming in Vermont that is confusing for anyone growing food, is desiring to become a farmer, is beginning to farm as well as for existing farmers. Allowing municipalities to regulate farming would also be a continued source of contention and acrimony in our communities. I also want to talk about the Schedule F and income threshold criteria for qualifying for REP regulation from my personal experience as a beginning farmer. I started my sheep farm, Fools Farm LC, in 2022 with purchase of 20 weaned lambs. My 20 sheep are obviously more than 15, but lambs are not mature ewes. Raising a flock of sheep for meat production means that I had to raise those lambs for 2 years before they could be bred the first time. This is because if I would have bred the lambs the year they were born, the pregnancy could have stunted their growth and result in malpresentations or even birth defects during lambing the following year, ruining the outlook of a healthy and full-grown breeding flock that will produce high-quality market lambs year after year. So during 2022, 2023, and 2024, I was investing about $15,000 to $20,000 a year to launch my small farming operation out of pocket, not harvesting income from lambs until the first slaughter in the fall of 2024. Through filing Schedule F with the IRS, I could at least write off my investments during those years. Furthermore, as I started farming in our particular location, we noticed during those first years that we had excess groundwater right at the entry of our barn in our barnyard, right where we needed to store and pile the manure. Obviously, we knew that this was totally against the REP water quality rule. In order for the young business to not lose its good standing right from the start, we needed to be eligible for best management practices funding with the AFM. Because we were able to receive our farm determination by the agency early, we were able to receive a PMT grant in 2024, 1 year after our initial application, to redo our barnyard and to install a new manure pad so that we're now in compliance. You see, the changes the agency is proposing could possibly limit their jurisdiction and lead to further anomalous results, considering the goal of supporting beginning farmers like myself with being in good standing with the rules. The agency argues that their proposal would still allow for beginning farmers to become subject to the RPs because of the existing criteria that gives the Secretary of Agriculture the power to approve someone's business plan. Again, as a German who spent my teenage years in East Germany, where the GDR was generally viewed as a communist state, that heavily regulated what farms had to produce exactly what, giving a Vermont agency so much authority that they can approve or not approve a beginning farmer's business plan based on their own discretion without clear checks and balances written into law does not seem to be a favorable idea at all. In summary, we don't see any reason based on the Vermont Supreme Court decision to open up the RFP statutorily, as anyone who claims they are farming as a sole proprietor with the IRS consequently should be subject to the rules that apply for farmers. That is a matter of policy coherence and accountability, not a matter of agency capacity and budget. Most importantly, it is a matter of setting a little incentive for people to start farming businesses, to access the competitive resources available for farming practice. Furthermore, while I'm almost at the end, while our coalition has much sympathy for the desire to produce who donate their crops more cleanly into the purview of the REPs, each coalition member has a set of their own agendas with regard to the needed and desired REP amendment that which exceeds the scope of what we're trying to achieve in the remedy of the May 30th Vermont Supreme Court ruling. As you know, for rural Vermont, it is important, as we noted earlier, that the agency has promised us to reopen the REPs for rulemaking after the session. This commitment was made to us prior to the session to remedy that they have not implemented the last statutory changes to the REP rule in 2021, when Act 41 redefined the definition of farming last to include composting of food residuals as farming. Long story short, there's no reason for the agency not to propose rule changes more equitably for all stakeholders that need to be at the table for that with a proper rulemaking process after this session. We are hopeful that we all find good common ground here today as our coalition at the Vermont League of City and Towns believe that there's no need to reopen the REPs to solve this issue presented by the Vermont Supreme Court ruling. We are very thankful and in alignment with the idea that was of the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets to codify a right to grow food that protects anyone engaged in farming practice from zoning requirements that currently could be prohibited but the same. In a northern climate like ours, such a right must include the husbandry of livestock where the land.
I don't mean to, but we've got like.
This is my last sentence.
Okay.
Because no one said that we are living in a northern climate here. We can't grow plants year round. Husbandry of livestock is really crucial as a conservation practices and as a meat and dairy product present year round nutrition and valuable source of protein as an essential part of our food security. We also have been doing and will continue to outreach to our members on this issue and encourage them to come forward to you guys with their own concerns about this matter. So thank you so much for listening through this. This is all the points I wanted to make today.
Questions? You go first.
Senior Senator first. Well, thank you. As usual, Caroline, very good testimony. I don't know about you, but I'm tired from just watching you read all that. But I do have a question.
Yeah.
One of the things that you brought up was a private homeowners association, which seems to me to be a new part of this.
Right.
Is that happening where people?
It's one of my experience when I was looking for land access. I was coming across a community in Randall where there were beautiful, like 50-acre parcels they were selling off for individual residential homes, but their bylaws were prohibitive of agricultural activities.
Oh.
So even if we do this, this is just a rule one stands at this point, not a coalition ask, because we also really see the need that we need to get this done. But it's just to bring it to your awareness. We do this, private homeowner associations do their own dance.
Okay, it seemed to be expanding the scope of what we're looking at.
I'll ask her, can they legally do that? If you buy it, can they, go ahead, I'm not real.
Samantha Shanagan, homeowners associations can enforce covenant requirements and prohibited land uses that are not consistent with municipal or state regulation. A really common example that we care a lot about is accessory dwelling units. So state law says municipalities have to permit accessory dwelling units. We happen to like them and are happy with that. But a homeowners association can prohibit.
On that larger parcel of property that, hey, he had 200 acres, let's say, cut it into 4, and you could start a home association that says just for
Yes.
that no agriculture, and that would stand up in the court.
Yes, and it happens, it's prolific. Yes.
I guess that may be a you throw in the candy.
There is a bill in the House, I won't recall the number right now, that proposes some changes and restrictions. Actually, there's one in the Senate right next door. They don't currently include protections for agricultural uses or right to grow food. But some other changes related to housing and like the rental of properties and homeowners associations.
Ready?
Good job.
All right.
Okay. I want to thank all of you to come in. We're gonna keep on talking about this, a lot more. But I think the thing that I'm happiest about. I'm not saying this is where it's gonna go. The committee's got a lot to digest and discuss, but. We are a lot more aligned than a lot of situations that we see in this building. And I think that you have seen us over and over and over again, that we are going to protect farmers as hard as we can. But we also have to be realistic about what we can get done. And, we have other people in the building that we have to, contend with. Our decisions have to be in agreement with 25 other senators, and then we have to get it over on the other side and get that to work as well. But I think we're in a good position. We're gonna keep on talking. We're gonna keep on asking you guys those questions, and we appreciate all of you very much. So,
Thanks. Yeah.
committee, I don't really want to open up on anything else, today, with anything that we have. Any more discussion that you want to have openly about this right now, or, call it good?
I'm still reading Caroline's.
Yeah.